Madam President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Madam President, I rise today in support of my bill, the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act. If voted into law, this bill would begin the process of delivering long overdue justice to stolen Native children and to their communities. The Indian boarding school system was one of the most devastating federal creations in American history. The scale was truly staggering. For over a century, the United States forced hundreds of thousands of children out of their homes and into over 500 boarding schools. Now, these boarding schools were not unlike prisons. At least 408 schools were federally funded. They were scattered across 37 states, including Alaska and Hawaii. By the 1920s, 83% of school-aged indigenous children were in boarding schools. Imagine 4 out of every 5 Native children taken from their families, some never to be seen again. The process was a waking nightmare. Armed officers were sent onto reservations to rip children as young as 4 from their families. Mothers and fathers who resisted could be severely punished. Once at boarding school, kids were stripped of their heritage. Their hair was cut off, their clothing was burned, and they were given new names. Children who tried to practice even remnants of their native cultures could be starved, whipped, and put in solitary confinement. Many children were farmed out to nearby properties for forced labor. Some were deployed to fight in war. Some were sexually abused. Conditions at the boarding schools were deadly. Dormitories were overcrowded so that diseases spread easily. Documentation shows that hundreds of children died in these schools. It is estimated that the actual number of deaths was in the thousands or possibly even the tens of thousands. So far, 53 mass graves have been uncovered. Some are unmarked. Many children's remains were never returned to their families. The boarding school's motto was, "Kill the Indians and save the man." This approach was part of a larger effort. By isolating children from their families and their cultures, it was possible to break down the fabric of tribal nations and take land more easily. Decision makers calculated that it was, quote, cheaper to educate our wards than to make war on them. Congress funded the majority of these schools, often using funds held in trust accounts that were legally designated for the benefit of tribal nations. Congress paid for the schools and then authorized law enforcement to take Indian children from their homes and their tribes. It now comes to this Congress to do everything we can to begin to heal the damage that this body inflicted. Make no mistake, the harms of the Indian boarding schools lives on today. In my time working on this bill, I've heard countless harrowing stories from survivors and from their families. There isn't an indigenous community in this country that hasn't been affected. Survivors have faced chronic medical issues and psychological trauma. They have struggled to reconnect with their loved ones, their language, and their cultures. We cannot rectify that past until we face it head on. And there is still so much that we don't know about these boarding schools. We don't know how many children died in boarding school custody. We don't know the full spectrum of the violence that occurred. We don't know all of the ways the schools affect survivors and descendants to this day. My bill would establish a Truth and Healing Commission to find those answers. The commission would formally investigate the Indian boarding schools to determine what happened and the lasting impact these schools have on survivors, their families, and their tribal communities. The Commission would hold hearings and convenings for victims to speak about their experiences, some for the very first time. The Commission would have the authority to use subpoena power to gather witness testimony and to review documentation. The Commission would be charged with making recommendations about how the history of the Indian boarding schools should inform federal policy today. It would address how the federal government should acknowledge its role in this systematic attempt to eradicate indigenous cultures and how to take that history into account when developing new federal policies and budgets. One last note. The boarding school policy ended just before 1970. Most of those affected have passed away, but there are remaining survivors in their 60s, 70s, and beyond. Every day that goes by, these survivors grow older, and their chance to tell their stories moves further away. These people have been harmed enough. Their wounds go deep, and they deserve a chance to stand before the United States government and tell their stories in their lifetimes. I urge my colleagues not to delay adoption of this bill. Our actions cannot make up for the harms that Congress inflicted, but by moving now, we can at least offer some token of care to those survivors who offer themselves up as living witnesses of a cruel chapter in American history. Make no mistake, this work will be painful, but it will make us a stronger nation. By telling the truth, we can give communities a better chance to heal, and we can begin to repair the U.S. government's relationship with tribal nations. This bill has broad support. It is bipartisan. It is supported by boarding school survivors, and 32 members of Congress have co-sponsored the bill. One co-sponsor, Senator Klobuchar, was unable to be here tonight, and she asked me to submit a statement from her for the record on her behalf.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I urge my colleagues now to pass this bill. We should delay no longer. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The senator from Alaska.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that privileges of the floor be granted to my second session summer interns, Maddie McGowan, Mason Oney, Zayden Shivens, Ben Lassie, Ellen Kennedy, Grayson McGuire, Kara Johnson, Mariana Lowe, Dylan Thompson, Kelsey Kimmel, and my Senate Committee on Indian Affairs intern, Naishi Andrew, for the month of July 2024 in the 118th Congress.
Without objection.
Madam President, I am here today to follow my colleague, Senator Warren, to discuss the legislation that we have been working on together, S.1723. This is the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies. As Senator Warren has just noted, this is legislation that will allow the nation to address a chapter of American history that I think has been overlooked for far too long. This is a dark history, a dark legacy of the Indian boarding school era. From 1819 to 1969, not too terribly long ago, but throughout that period, the U.S. government forcibly removed Native children from their families and their tribes, placing them in boarding schools. These Indian boarding schools, as they came to be called, were not just education institutions, but many were tools to eradicate Native cultures, languages, and traditions to quote, civilize Native American children. And the traumatic effects of these boarding schools are still being felt by their survivors. Not only by their survivors, but by their children, and really by their communities as well. And I've heard from some of those survivors that are still with us that the act of sharing, being able to tell the truth about their experiences, can help contribute to healing. But it takes courage. It takes extraordinary courage, and I've heard that. Fred John Jr., who is the son of Katie John and Fred John Sr., attended the Wrangell Institute in Alaska. He was assigned the number 77. He was not referred to as Fred John Jr. He was number 77. In 2018, he wrote that following his time at the boarding school, he still carried the pains and scars from his time at the Institute. He never talked about it until his children gave him the strength and the encouragement to do so. General Pratt, who opened the Carlisle Institute School, established what he called a, quote, rapid coercive assimilation process in these schools. And the goal there was to separate Native children from their tribes, from their language, and from their ways, so that they might never want to return home. The stated purpose of the policy at that time was to, quote, kill the Indian to save the man. Again, a dark, dark legacy. So our committee report details this history. However, to hear just some memories of how these policies were implemented really is devastating. Fred John Jr. describes seeing a group of kids arriving from Anaktuvuk Pass. This is a small Native community at the gates of the Arctic, very far into the interior of the state, very far, 1,000 miles away from the Wrangell Institute down in southeastern. But Fred John Jr. remembered the fur parkas that they were wearing. He remembered their caribou pants. These were kids who came from a part of the state where caribou was that primary food source. And he remembered how beautiful they all were. But when they came in, the school staff stripped them down, taking all their clothes, all the food, including the dried caribou, the salmon that they had been given to tide them over. The staff showered them, shaved them, and gave them a number. But the most painful in his retelling was how all of these clothes, the beautiful fur parkas, the caribou pants, all their clothes, everything, were taken and burned up in a furnace to completely wipe away their connection, not just the clothing, but to the culture. In this time period, students were punished and endured violence. Some survived and are pursuing healing, but unfortunately many others did not. This photo, there's two of them actually here on the same chart, and maybe difficult to see from a distance, but the photo on top is of a child laying on the floor, and it's part of the Sheldon Jackson collection at the Presbyterian Historical Society. And this shows an Alaska Native child aboard a ship, it's called the Revenue Cutter Bear, to be taken to the boarding schools by Sheldon Jackson. According to Alaska Native Heritage Center research, most of the children who were taken aboard never returned back to their homes. It was a long and lengthy journey, but many went to school, but never returned to their homes, passing away at the various boarding schools they were sent to, including the Sitka and Carlisle Industrial Indian Schools. This photo on the bottom here, you can see how young these children are. This comes from the National Library of Congress, and it shows a group of children who were sent to Catholic Holy Cross mission, again in the interior part of the state. Here they're wearing essentially military uniforms, everything from the boots to the uniforms themselves. Benjamin Jasik Dolchak was one of the experts that we worked on with this topic, and he shared his research, including these photos. According to testimony from elders who attended the Holy Cross School, every child received a haircut upon entrance, but if they disobeyed, if they angered any of the matrons or the priests, their heads would be completely shaved as punishment. And these are just a handful of the stories from survivors from Alaska, but Alaska was not the exception. Over the 19th and the 20th century, stories like these from survivors are, unfortunately, not too uncommon across the country. One of the most profound reasons for Congress to establish this commission is that it is time the federal government take responsibility for the legacy of its harmful policies. So our commission will provide a Native-led process for communities to share the stories, share the truth, and pursue healing with the goal of breaking the cycle of intergenerational trauma. And like other congressional advisory commissions that this body has established, it will be an independent, bipartisan formal forum with expertise to examine the federal Indian boarding school's legacy, but also to document it and to provide recommendations for action. Our legislation builds on an extensive congressional record that was developed through strong bipartisan work that started several Congresses ago. We have had multiple hearings throughout our committee, listening sessions, and meetings and research by the relevant Senate and House committees. Over 100 written comments for the record from Indian tribes, from Native communities and organizations, individuals, and religious institutions helped shape this legislation that we have reported to the floor of the Senate. And I think it's worth taking a moment here to talk about that process that we had in the Indian Affairs Committee. We had a pretty robust markup that began with a strong bipartisan effort by our staffs to put together a substitute amendment to the bill for the committee to consider. And that substitute amendment was then further amended by our down-dais members on the committee who offered some really good amendments to address the hot-button issues, including extending subpoena authority to the commission. These amendments were adopted, and the bill as amended was reported from the committee by voice vote. And through these additional amendments that we adopted at the business meeting, we now have a commission that will have to meet higher standards than any other congressionally established federal commission in order to exercise that subpoena authority. And that's okay. That's okay here because subpoena authority should be a tool of last resort. But I do think that it is important for the commission to have the tool to ensure that it can meet its investigatory function and deliver complete findings and recommendations to Congress. So I want to thank all those, the many who have shared their stories. Frank John Jr., so many who have shared their stories and for offering ways to pursue healing. Again, I want to acknowledge and thank Senator Warren for her leadership on this issue and for the leadership of Chairman Schatz from the Indian Affairs Committee for being a great partner as we have worked to develop this legislation through the committee process. So I'm looking forward to building even more bipartisan support for this and would urge my colleagues to support this very important and very timely matter. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor, and I see my friend and colleague from Colorado is here.
Madam President.
The senator from Colorado.
Thank you. And standing here listening to my distinguished colleague from Alaska, it's hard not to be angry at what we as a country did. And we're here today to reckon with this disgraceful part of our past. The Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies in the U.S. Act is the first attempt by the federal government to formally investigate and address this horrific period in United States history. This legislation and the truth that it will unearth is an essential step toward healing. Now, from the early 19th to the mid-20th century, the United States government established 408 federal boarding schools across the United States. Now, these schools were created for the purpose of stripping Native American children of their language, their religion, their cultural identity. In the over 100 years that these schools were in operation, our government took an estimated 100,000 Native American children from their homes and from their families. An estimated 40,000 of these children died alone, without their family, at government-sanctioned schools. And this is the story of one of those schools. Now, in 2022, I visited Colorado's Fort Lewis College, which it's a wonderful, remarkable college, has one of the highest, if not the highest, proportion of Native American students of any college in the country. But it traces its origin back to the Fort Lewis Indian Boarding School. And I went there to discuss the boarding school's history with students at Fort Lewis and with the Tribal Council of the Southern Ute and the Ute Mountain Ute tribes. It's because of the hard work of Fort Lewis College and the hard work of the tribes that we can bring many of the details of this dark history to light. Now, Fort Lewis was established in 1892 in Hesperus, Colorado. To call Fort Lewis a school really that's a bald-faced lie. Native American children were not given an education in reading or writing or math. The education model instead was based on assimilation into a white and Western way of life. And it came at a truly devastating cost. From 1892 to 1909, an estimated 1,100 children attended this boarding school in southern Colorado. These children were forcibly taken from their families of the Southern Ute, the Navajo, Apache, and other numerous tribes. Desperate to save their children, many Southern Ute families refused to turn their children over. As punishment, the school's superintendent, Dr. Thomas Breen, cut off the tribe's food rations to try to force the children's attendance. Breen's tactics failed. The Southern Ute tribe was steadfast in their resistance and their refusal to give up their children. Upon arrival at Fort Lewis, students were stripped of their clothing, their names, as Senator Murkowski said, their hair. Each day, the children were required to perform manual labor, like digging ditches and planting crops, oftentimes in the hot mid-afternoon sun. Combined with the poor sanitation and lack of food, many students quickly became ill. Disaster struck in the school's first year. A tuberculosis epidemic hit, followed by trachoma, known at that time as sore eyes. 2 children died, 4 others became blind. All were under the age of 12. Now, punishment of children at Fort Lewis was often severe. One father reported that his sons were forced to sleep outside in a coal shed in the middle of winter without adequate blankets. Superintendent Breen himself was known for sexually abusing his young female students and teachers. When the girls became pregnant, school officials made sure that they, quote unquote, disappeared, transporting them to other schools to avoid suspicion. Our federal government never held Breen accountable. The school reports show that 31 children died during the 16 years that Fort Lewis School was in operation. I can guarantee you the actual number is probably higher. This is the story of just one of these schools. There were 4 others in Colorado. There were 403 more across the country. That's 407 other Superintendent Breens, 10,000s of children who died in unmarked graves and who never saw their families again. It's hard to imagine why our government was preying on our own children. Why would our government sanction such conduct? Our government understood that erasing Native people's identity was a necessary condition to erase their claim to their land, to assimilate them right out of existence, and to ignore the lands guaranteed by treaty to the tribes. Don't take my word for it. In less than 50 years, from 1847 to 1934, Native Americans lost 2/3 of their tribal lands, of their treaty lands. And the legacies of this deep trauma remain embedded in tribal communities today. In Colorado, we see it as the high rates of poverty, the high rates of addiction, the high rates of suicide among our Native American communities. We see it in children who don't know their parents' indigenous names, who have lost their own language, families who don't know what happened to their relatives, to their ancestors, many of whom just never returned home. The Truth in Healing Act is not going to erase this dark past, but it does acknowledge our responsibility to unearth the stories of suffering and injustice that we have buried for generations. In 2022, I joined Secretary Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, at a dedication ceremony for the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site. In front of tribal leaders and elected officials, Secretary Haaland told the crowd, and I quote, "Stories like the Sand Creek Massacre are not easy to tell, but it is our duty to assure that they are told and that this story is part of America's story." Fort Lewis Indian Boarding School, along with the 407 others, is a part of our story. When we pass the Truth in Healing Act, we make a choice to tell the whole story. And we make a choice never to repeat it. Madam President, I yield back the floor.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Madam President, I rise today in support of the Truth in Healing Commission on Indian Boarding Schools Act and in remembrance of the thousands of Native children who died and suffered in these schools. Thousands of children were ripped from their families in the name of assimilation. Thousands of children were the victims of physical and sexual abuse. And thousands of children were forbidden from practicing their culture and speaking their native languages. The operation of federal Indian boarding schools by the United States Department of the Interior is one of the darkest chapters of American history, a chapter whose consequences are still being felt deeply by boarding school survivors, their families, and tribal communities. The federal government funded more than 400 Indian boarding schools over the course of 150 years. One of the earliest being the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, where Wampanoag children from my own home state of Massachusetts were stolen from their families, sent hundreds of miles away, and subjected to cruel, inhumane assimilation practices. When Captain Richard Henry Pratt founded the Carlisle Indian School in 1879, he imbued it with this motto: "Kill the Indian, save the man." But we know all too well that these boarding schools did only the former. They acted as a violent means of assimilation and an essential tool in the United States government's dispossession of Native peoples' Aboriginal rights, land, and culture. Children as young as 4 years old were subjected to systemic violent abuse. The Department of the Interior's recent investigation found that children were renamed from Native names to English names, had their hair cut off, were discouraged or prevented from using their languages, religion, and cultural practices, and organized into units to perform military drills. The Department of the Interior has since identified marked and unmarked burial sites at 53 schools. And this is just the tip of the tragic, horrifying, unacceptable iceberg of our history. In a confidential message to Congress, Thomas Jefferson said about Native people that, quote, when they withdraw themselves to the culture of a small piece of land, they will perceive how useless to them are their extensive forests and will be willing to pare them off from time to time. He directed Congress, Thomas Jefferson, to, quote, encourage them to abandon hunting so that the extensive forest necessary in the hunting life will then become useless. What was once a plot to take native land also became the foundation of our nation's century-long legacy of forced assimilation, displacement, and ultimately attempted eradication of native language and culture and the people themselves. We have not simply a moral responsibility, but a legal obligation to the welfare of tribes across the country to uphold treaty rights and to recognize the dark history of our own country. And this obligation cannot be met without securing truth, justice, and healing for every Native person, family, and tribe affected by these genocidal policies. In Massachusetts, we have seen the healing process in action. After centuries of forced assimilation led to the extinction of the Wampanoag language, members of the Mashpee, Aquinnah, Assonet, and Herring Pond Wampanoag communities came together to widely reintroduce and re-engage with their ancestral language. And today, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribes school serves as a shining example of how Native students can thrive when they are surrounded by their language and their culture and not stripped of it. But tribes should not be left to fight alone, to recover what was stolen from them by the American government. Passing the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding Schools Act would be an essential step to turn the American government from an historic enemy to a future ally in righting these wrongs. So I thank Senator Schatz. I thank him for his great leadership on these issues and his excellent staff. I thank Senator Murkowski for organizing this floor time for us to bring attention to this part of American history that we must never forget. And Senator Warren for introducing this important legislation that begins to put us on a path of truth and healing. So with that, Madam President, I yield back the balance of my time.
The senator from Hawaii.
I want to thank everybody for being part of this series of very compelling speeches about the atrocities that the United States government perpetrated against the first peoples of the United States. For over 150 years, the United States government stole hundreds of thousands of Native children from their families and communities and forced them into federally run and supported boarding schools, often far away from their homes. These institutions, by design, worked with efficient, brutal systematic diligence to force Native children to abandon their culture, abandon their language, and abandon their very identity through unspeakably cruel punishment, abuse, and neglect. As one school superintendent noted, quote, "Only by complete isolation of the Indian child from his savage antecedents can he be satisfactorily educated." These inhumane policies were part of the government's long-standing colonial project to rob Native peoples land through assimilation. The goal was, quote, to civilize Native children by killing the Indian in him and saving the man. That was the motto at the time, killing the Indian and saving the man. These were not faraway bad guys. These were employees and agents of the United States federal government. To hear this history today is appalling, it's infuriating, it is heartbreaking, because as the late Senator Ted Kennedy put it, quote, "It challenges the most precious assumptions about what this country stands for: cultural pluralism, equity and justice, the integrity of the individual, freedom of conscience and action, and the pursuit of happiness." But it's not just a history that demands a reckoning, it's also the lasting legacy of these immoral policies which continue to this day. The Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, which I chair, has heard devastating testimony from survivors, descendants, communities, and leaders about the impact of these schools decades later. A legacy of enduring trauma passed down from parent to child to grandchild to great-grandchild, fracturing families and communities over and over again. I want you to imagine a Native community with no kids left, just the parents and grandparents. Imagine not just the trauma for that group of children who were abducted, but what kind of community is left there? As a parent, I would be absolutely catatonic for the rest of my life. Across Indian reservations and Hawaiian homelands and Alaska Native communities, from coast to coast in cities and in rural communities, and we see it manifested in so many ways within Native communities, whether it's higher rates of mental health challenges or substance abuse or suicide. And so it's not enough to just face up to the wrongs of the past, although that is essential. It's equally important to provide justice and support for survivors and descendants. The Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act does both of these things. The bill establishes a Truth and Healing Commission as well as several advisory bodies tasked with uncovering the full scope of what took place at these schools. The commission will provide a platform for survivors to share their experience, for the nation to hear and acknowledge their pain. Doing so ensures that these stories are preserved and that the atrocities are never forgotten. Importantly, this bill is sensitive to the trauma experienced by survivors and descendants and requires the commission to provide them with trauma-informed care. Ultimately, the commission's final report will provide a comprehensive account of the boarding school era and recommendations to Congress for future action. Madam President, before I close, I want to take a moment to directly acknowledge the survivors, the descendants, the families, and the communities that have been devastated by these policies. Some of them are here with us today in the gallery, and their advocacy and courage have been the driving force behind this bill. And the fact that we've reached this point, having passed the bill unanimously out of the committee and ready to consider it before the full United States Senate, is testament to their unwavering commitment to truth and justice. Their stories will not be forgotten. This bill is not just a legislative act. It's a moral imperative. It is our duty to unflinchingly confront the full scope of this shameful history and help to heal the deep pains that this very body helped create. We can't change the past, but we can and we must shape a better future. A future where the mistakes of the past are never again repeated, where every child can grow up with pride in their heritage and their identity. And so I urge my colleagues to join me and Senator Murkowski and all of the previous speakers and the author of this bill, Senator Warren, in supporting this important legislation. Too many have waited too long for truth, for closure, and for justice. And by passing this bill, we can finally begin the work. I yield the floor.